So we are here today with Mr. John Luther, co-founder and worker owner at Limeleaf Worker Collective. And before we start answering questions from Reddit today, John's going to tell us a little bit about himself and his co-op.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Good to be here. Thanks, Chris. Nice to meet you guys in person, sort of. Yeah, Limeleaf is a fairly new cooperative. We started in March, like March 18th, I think is the date we filed the papers. We are in new, and I get into this in our blog a little bit. If you go to limeleaf.io, our blog is there. I made some posts when we were getting going about just like the experience of setting up a co-op and all that. In New York, you have to have at least 5 people to be an official co-op under the like regulations and the statutes and stuff. We're 3 people. Um, so we hopefully someday will be, 5 or more, maybe 10. But so we had to do a whole thing about doing an LLC. And so if anybody is in New York and is curious about starting a co-op with fewer than 5 people, check out our blog because we worked around it through LLCs and some great legal advice from Albany Law School. They have a kind of incubator legal program that helps people get bootstrapped, specifically, um, co-ops and other, kind of democratically operated organizations. So anyway, so what we do is software development. We do contract work for all kinds of different verticals and industries. So everything from video streaming technologies to game development, mobile stuff, like a pretty wide berth of things that we do. I'm more the product person, and then my co-founders Blaine and Eric are engineers. Um, so they are going to end up doing most of the real work and everything. So I guess I'm more an operations and product person. And then eventually we are going to develop our own products. There's one right now that we're kind of specking out, and hopefully get that going later in the year. And we are cooperatively organized and democratically operated because, I mean, the 3 of us have worked in tech for a long time. I've worked at small companies, I've worked at very large companies, and just the industry is, I think a lot of people, this is getting a lot more publicity, is just the way technology companies have traditionally been run. There's the model where 5 people own the whole company, even if it's a public company. There's still like Mark Zuckerberg, for example. Facebook, Meta, whatever is a public company, but they can do literally nothing without him saying they can because he controls the voting shares. So we wanted a model just that was more equitable, um, that had sort of provisions for, not just automatically laying off a bunch of people when you hit a rough patch. So having provisions in the company for setting aside resources for, because there's inevitably, ups and downs. So just frankly, a more sort of humane operating environment. And that's the way we wanted to structure it. And a co-op was a natural fit for that. So that's why we did it that way. So I know it was a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's what Limeleaf is and what we do. And so yeah, I'm happy to be with you guys and talk more about co-ops because it's something I like to talk about.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great. We're always happy to have more tech co-op people around to.
I think you're going to be
do our
seeing
tech.
a lot more. Yeah, we have some good friends in Ohio. They started a company called comp.coop, and they're a tech company that is specifically doing work for other co-ops. So they be your IT provider. If you're starting
Mhm.
a grocery co-op, whatever, they'll help you do point of sale. So that kind of stuff. And both of those people are actually, one of them's a guy I used to work with, and they both were working in a very large tech company, and we're just sort of like, we don't want to do this anymore. So anyway, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more tech
Yeah.
companies.
I mean, we've always had a lot of like web development shops that are co-ops.
Yep.
I know we've got a couple like um, tech support for just like consumer tech support. The like Boston Tech Collective, and I
Yep.
think the San Francisco Tech Collective do that. But yeah, it's great to have more, like expanding into more of like that, the industry and doing the bespoke software and all that kind of stuff is, yeah, super cool.
For sure.
Chris, do you have any questions or?
No, I was just looking at the website. I like it. I was just kind of
Thanks.
curious. So if somebody was like went to your website and they like, what would be like good parts of your websites to check out?
That's what we're kind of trying to figure that out ourselves. The site's been through 3 or 4 revisions, and the expertise area is probably where the most detail is, just about the kind of things. We have this sort of nice problem to have in that we can do pretty much anything. Like, I know that might be a humble brag, but like, Blaine and Eric have built pretty much any kind of software you can think of. I've built all kinds of different stuff. We've all done, low level stuff, like video codecs is an area that I used to work in. That's and encryption. I've worked in that. It's very technical stuff. So we're kind of like, well, how do we want to present this? And you don't want to just tell everybody, yeah, we can do everything, because then it's not specific. And they're like, okay, well, are you going to solve the specific problem I have? So we're trying to kind of focus the site on just, be more specifically service oriented. That's why the services page is a little bit, it's kind of high level. So yeah, this page experience, the expertise one, gives the most information about what we're able to do. The about page is, kind of just our backgrounds and who we are and stuff. And the blog is where I wrote about like starting the company. Blaine and Eric are going to start writing more technical posts, like safer binary decoding in Go. I know everybody is wondering about that, but it's actually, there's that kind of stuff is for technical audience. We hope that'll bring a lot of people to the site. So anyway, expertise is probably where people want to look. And then obviously, if you want to contact us, the contact page has, we don't have a contact form or anything. We're email people. So, or you can schedule a call with us with the link on the site. But
Cool. Yeah, I wonder, have y'all talked to Jim Johnson, who's part of Geo? So he
no.
gets all into the tech stuff.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Jim is in a constant high demand. So, but yeah, he's a tech guy. That was his first. He started out in the worker co-op movement by helping convert his company that he was contracting for into a worker co-op and becoming a founding
Cool.
member.
Okay.
But
yeah, I'd love to talk to him. I'll reach out to him. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
show up to a Geo monthly meeting someday,
Oh, okay.
and he will be there.
For sure.
Otherwise, good luck getting a hold of that man. He is probably
Yeah, because he tries to get. I think he's like the type of person who would want to read that blog, and I feel like he tries to have those conversations in Geospace too. But
He'll try to have some with me, some of the more technical stuff. I'm like, sounds great. Yeah,
Sure. Right. All right.
All right. Great. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Any final thoughts on your co-op or anything?
No, I think that's about it. We're just, committed to democratic. I know there's been a lot of press lately also about like worker ownership. I don't remember the guy, some hedge fund guy. He was on 60 Minutes, and all power to him. It's great, but it's not what I think you and I would call worker ownership. It's like,
no power to those guys.
We'll
frankly,
take over your company. Yeah, exactly. There's no voting power. There's no, it's sort of like, we'll give you a pittance of shares, and now you quote have an ownership stake. But anyway, so what we're about is true co-op, style, true ownership, true democratically operated. The 7 principles that we've all read 1,000 times, and that's what we're about.
I will ask you one question. You're in New York, right? All three of you?
Yes, we're
Um,
upstate. Yeah.
are you connected at all with like the New York City, or you're in upstate?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you connected with any regional or national co-op networks?
Yeah, the USFWC. We're members of. We're part of a sort of cooperative group called Patio that is kind of centered in Europe, but is now got people in South America and um, Collab. I think they kind of are connected to New York. I think they used to have like a locus or a nexus or whatever in Ithaca or something. But yeah, I think one of the things that we want to do is get more involved with people down in the city because that's where the center of gravity is for, most
Right.
things in New York State. We're near Albany, which, there's a lot of government stuff happening there naturally, but I think that there's a lot more co-op activity going on down in the city than there
Yeah,
is.
that's why I was kind of wondering if you'd been in contact with Nick Knock or the New
Well,
York
we're
City
doing
network
a
or.
lot of the research. Yeah, we're aware of a lot of them. We haven't met with them or anything, but yeah, we just collected this long list when we were setting up the company of people that we eventually want to talk to in New York.
Nice. Great. Well, feel free to ping us. We've got
Yeah,
connections
for
with all
sure.
those folks.
Okay,
Send
awesome.
you some emails. All right. So with that, we can segue into questions from Reddit, and let me pull them up here. Let's see if I can find them. There we go. Okay. So actually, I think this is one that John had mentioned he might have some insight into.
Yep.
So we'll start here. This is from Reddit user Fancy Football 7832. They ask, are founders classified as employees since they are members? Do they have to get paid minimum wage? What about late hires? Are they also members? Who are also members, rather? And he says, I'll just read it here. I guess I've been digging around online. I can't find any answers to this. Who exactly is classified as an employee and has to get paid minimum wage? Can regular members choose to do unpaid labor to help the company? What about the founders? I should add that I live in California. And edit, I should add that I'm referring to legality, not the individual policies of cooperatives, as I know those vary a
I
lot.
think so. Yeah. Someone, I
So,
think, an earlier person who answered it talked about operating agreements and bylaws and stuff. So my knowledge of this is limited to New York State, I should say. So I don't know if they're different. I know California has like specific co-op, classifications and stuff. I don't know if those are different from New York or what. But anyway, all I can speak to is what we had to do when we set ourselves up. Our understanding, and we've talked about this with a finance person as well as a lawyer, is um, you know what you're going to run into is, do you want to be W-2 employees, 1099 employees, K-1 employees? There's all these different ways that you can pay yourself essentially. We chose to be W-2 employees, and I mean get into some of the reasons for that, but and my understanding is if you have W-2 employees, you must pay them minimum wage because that's you'll get even the notification when we set stuff up. We got this thing from New York State about all the things you have to know about minimum wage. Um, so, but there's also ways to structure it where, so basically the way we're going to do it is kind of pay ourselves a, you know, a salary on the W-2 basis, whether or not it's minimum wage or not. We haven't decided what the actual numbers yet. And then for the patronage dividends, we're going to pay those out. And again, there's only three of us. I know it operates a lot differently with patronage dividends when you get into like people who actually, let's say, work in a grocery co-op or something and they're doing 4 hours a week. Like the way we're doing it is structuring those as more of like a bonus because we wanted to pay them out to ourselves quarterly instead of at the end of year and letters of notice and all. I mean, we might eventually, as we get more people, get into that. but because we're small, we're just sort of like, okay, we're going to have our W-2 wages, and then we're going to have other income eventually when we hopefully have surplus that we'll pay that out to ourselves as patronage dividends, but for payroll purposes, it'll be bonuses. So that's my understanding of minimum wage. And again, that's assuming that you're full time. There might be other ways you could structure it where you could have some people be W-2s, and then if you have people who are only going to be doing a few hours a week or something, have them be 1099s. I don't. My understanding is you don't have to have everybody be classified the same way. We're doing W-2s. I mean, mostly because we're just kind of lazy. Like we don't have to do. If you do 1099, you have to do your own quarterly taxes. You have to pay the 14% self-employment tax instead of 7.5. And we're just like, you know what? Let's just do this in this software called Gusto. They do everything for you. They'll do all the IRS stuff, and so that's why we decided to do that primarily. The K1 stuff is a lot more complicated. I don't pretend to understand a lot of that. It's essentially, that's the real partnership model where your K1 is where your income from the partnership is reported, and that's a whole other. I don't want to say can of worms because that makes it sound like it's a bad thing. I don't know if it's good or bad. I just know that it's a bit more complicated. And then later hires, I know that somebody in the comments on this one had talked about like having a probationary period. There's things in your bylaws you can do. I know this person doesn't want to get into that, but legally, if you hire them as an employee later, then yeah, they're a W-2 employee. You're gonna have to pay them minimum wage. I know in New York anyway, workers' comp, there's other things that that are mandated that you have to pay for people who are W-2 employees.
Yeah.
So naturally, long-winded answer to something that's very complicated. I mean, if this person wants to talk more about it, they're welcome to reach out to me and we can have I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but just having been through this and had a lot of meetings about it, I've got some knowledge about it.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of thing comes up a lot. I helped some people set up a worker co-op here in Montana a while back, several years ago. And this was, big issue. They ended up deciding to go with the LLC model, which is with the K1s and all that when it comes tax time. And to answer this guy's question, we kind of touched on this last month in our Reddit Q&A, that it depends on how you structure, the company. If you structure it as a cooperative corporation or as an S corp or anything like that, you should be a co-op cooperative corporation if you have that statute in your state. Then everybody is treated as an employee, and you've got to take care of all the the minimum wage and workman's comp and all that, which is why a lot of worker co-ops will, especially smaller ones, they're maybe starting a little less formally or just don't have the capacity to kind of do all the stuff they need to do to incorporate as an S corp. They will go with the LLC, and then because every member of the co-op is a partner in the LLC, they're an owner. They're not considered an employee. They don't have to be paid any wages. You're working at a business that you own, so anything that you take out is considered profit, basically. Now. And then they also didn't have to, pay workman's comp. And that was the big thing for them. It was cheaper to get started and to be able to do the work legally with, doing the LLC method. That said, when it came time to do taxes, everybody was like, what? Because it's completely different than what you're used to being an employee. And fortunately, we had a pretty decent bookkeeper who could kind of help the members through their individual taxes. But that's something to be aware of, is that your taxes become a lot more complicated when you do that. And so while
Yep.
it's got some benefits and it's easier in some ways, it can also be more complicated. And then also you'd want to think about down the road what you're going to want to be. If you're going to want to eventually become a cooperative corporation, most people say it's better to just start out like that. It's a lot more difficult to switch the type of company that you are down the road. Even I will say one last thing, even with the LLC model though, people who come in late, they'll have two options that you can give them. They can either become a member, in which case they also, will not be subject to minimum wage requirements and all that, or you're just going to have to treat them as an employee, in which case you're back to having employees. So,
and it does get it. But the way I understand it is that with an LLC, the more people you add as owner partners, it gets more complicated. So then you can shift from having an LLC be member managed to being manager managed, where like there's a person whose job it is to manage the LLC and everyone else is but there was one other thing and I think this is a somewhat legal aspect, is the difference between profit and surplus. And this is important for the patronage, dividends, all that stuff. Employees who are not members, not member owners, the money that they bring to the business that is in excess of the costs is called profit. What it goes to the dividends is the surplus, and they're two different things. So you have to definitely, and again, the legal aspects of that, I don't know, but I know at least for like bookkeeping and management purposes, like if all of your quote employees are the ones who've made all of the profit, that can't be paid out as surplus in patronage dividends. So there's that aspect to it as well, and you want to maybe think about that. That's another thing to just think through is how do we, now that's assuming that you're going to be profitable quickly, but
right.
I hope you are. But it's another one of those down the road things is, if you end up with two member owners and 50 employees, and the member owners are thinking they're going to get patronage, there's be a smaller pool of money to pay out as patronage dividends in that case, as opposed to everybody being a member owner and everybody getting patronage dividends.
Right. Yeah. So, as in with all these questions, talk to a bookkeeper, talk to an accountant, get some professional help. Definitely don't depend on people on YouTube to be the final word for you. This is the place to start, not the place to finish. Finding your answer.
I hope what we've done is give you an idea of the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
Not the
some
answer.
of the things to think about. All right, we'll move on here. Next one. User Socialist Credit asks about cooperative investment as a retirement plan. Says, I'm a recent college grad. I'm currently looking for a job. So this is all kind of hypothetical. I'm also in a relatively well-paying industry, software. This means I have the privilege of likely being able to set some money aside for retirement when I start working. Now, retirement's a long way off because I'm just entering the workforce, but I've been taught that the best way to make sure I actually have money when I'm old is to start saving young. That's pretty solid, I think. As a way to account for retirement or potentially a kid's college education, should I ever have kids, I was thinking about investing some of that money. But if I'm going to invest, I'd like to do some real good in the world instead of being just another guy trying to make a quick buck off the back of working people. Where do I really start looking into co-op investment, and what kind of return on investment can I expect for my retirement fund? I don't need a super high one because, again, retirement's a long way off, but it definitely needs to be above inflation. How do I find potential co-ops to fund? And there you go. That's pretty much it. So, this is another question that's actually come up a lot. And it's good that Socialist Credit here, glad that they're thinking about it this early in their life. So there was a Next Egg. Was a project that the SELC Solidarity Economy's Law Center put together to try to answer this question, try to provide some like something relatively simple and straightforward that people could invest in. If they want to have, they've got retirement savings, why would we want to put it into Wall Street and just invest in all those, traditional companies? Wouldn't it be better to invest it, in the co-op economy and solidarity economy? The last I heard, they kind of like that effort disintegrated basically over because they couldn't, in my understanding, and from what I read and heard of from them, they couldn't really philosophically get past this. How do you both try to make money from having money, which is what investing is, while also trying to rebalance the economy, right? And we're interested in, people with less having more, and so there is a kind of extractive nature almost built into the investment paradigm, and yeah, it was something that I think they were unable to figure out how to do in a way that fits with everybody's values. It's a real big question. So that's kind of on the philosophical level. I'd say it's a real open question. On the legal technical side of things, it's well,
the ESG movement, I think, has had some complications with this too, like the environmental, social. I can't remember what ESG stands for, but it's basically like, we want to invest in things that are helpful to the world, not destructive. And then all these gray lines start showing up, and it's like, well, the company, is doing renewable stuff, but they also own it. It gets very complicated. But what I was thinking of for this one is, I mean, like you said, this person is much more astute than I was at their age, their recent college. Now, again, might be an older, non-traditional student or something. I don't know, but like, I'm assuming it's a young person. And then when I graduated from college, I didn't even have a savings account, let alone thinking about retirement. So kudos to them for that. But I think in the comments somebody had mentioned the Northeast, the fund that basically gives loans to co-ops. You could start your own fund in that you could start a credit union, which is essentially a co-op model of finance. Now, and I don't know if there are minimum deposit amounts that credit unions need to have or anything, but if you're really thinking big and thinking long term, like maybe as part of your just portfolio, if you are going to be a business, an entrepreneur, let's say, you could have your software business or job, but then on the side you can start a co-op in your area, or I mean a credit union, and that credit union could then make loans to businesses of all kinds, but you could even have it sort of specialize in making loans to co-ops and that. Or but I think to your point, Josh, there is a bit of a like part of what we're trying to do, at least from my perspective in this whole movement, is not just have a bunch of capitalists who come in, dump a bunch of money in things, and then just sit back and and get paid a lot of money for not really doing anything, quote unquote, other than investing some money. So but that said, like you could have a think outside the box and set up a different type of investment fund that breaks the traditional rules or tries to disrupt the traditional model of doing that. I mean, I think it's ripe for somebody to try it, and starting small is probably the way to go, instead of, because if you're going to end up talking to VCs and everything else. If you try to do it as like a startup or something, you're going to get the same people investing in it that invest in everything else. But just to have it as like your sort of 401k, like I don't know how that would work, because the co-ops would have to have some class of investor share, and some do, but yes, and those would be trickier to find. I think they're probably rarer than co-ops that just are all member owner shares.
Yeah, it's that so there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. The people I know have been trying to go about this. The probably the most straightforward one is an investment club or an investment co-op.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our Geo members, Matt Noyes down in Colorado, he's involved with the Solidarity Fund down there, and they've invested in several co-ops. And um, and that's just one of many investing clubs that you can set up. And they invest in co-ops that do offer preferred shares. So the shares that don't come with any voting right. They have usually a variable return from 0 to 5 or 6% per year, depending on how the co-op does. Equal exchange, famously, they kind of pioneered the model, and have raised quite a bit of money that way. But a lot of co-ops who sell preferred shares don't just sell to anybody. So again, being part of a co-op that is actually a group of people with looking to invest some of their extra money in the co-op economy helps on that way. But what people who've been involved in this have found, or that I've heard, is this is not a replacement for a pension, or I mean that nobody has anymore, but a 401k even. It's a lot more high maintenance, right? You have to be directly involved, and you're asking questions about ROI is kind of beside the point. If you're concerned with return on investment, you shouldn't be. This isn't where you need to be, right? Because on the one hand, if what you're concerned with is return on investment, then that really is kind of a capitalist mentality of like, how much can I squeeze out of this? It needs to be a certain amount before I even bother.
Right.
But so what the people who are doing like the co-op investing clubs, those folks are committed to trying to, support a different kind of economy. And that's where they're getting their return. And so it's not paying their bills, and they may get a couple percent, and it may or may not be as much of inflation, but for them, that's not really the point. There are also a little bit more like formally, you could go with, get in contact with somebody like the Shared Capital or one of the Seed Commons funds. They also, I believe, all have ways for people to become members, basically join. There's co-ops, which are, again, specifically geared towards providing not investment capital, but low interest loans, non-extractive finance to co-ops. And there is some, return that goes to the people who provide that funding. But again, if you're in it for ROI, if you're like, I need to get 7% back, or I've got to beat the market, or, I need to beat a Vanguard index fund or something, like, it's probably not worth it, right?
Yep.
That's what I think.
I mean, the last thing I'll say is you can just also start your own software co-op, which is what I did. Me and my partners, and then your ROI, is your labor and the surplus that comes out of that business, and you don't need a lot of people. Like I said, there are only 3 of us in Limeleaf today. And there's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of, contrary to there's a lot of offshoring and it happened and everything. But if you really niche down and specialize in something very specific, there's a lot of work out there. So yeah, you could do that. And then you're in charge of your destiny in every aspect, like the kinds of contracts you take, the people you do business with, where your money comes from. That's all within your control. If you and your partner member owners are doing your own thing with a co-op.
Yeah. Chris, any thoughts on co-op retirement?
I was just wondering about how people who are investing, how they could collab with like worker co-ops and other co-ops to like push back against like structural degeneration of co-ops, or to push back against like the structural and kind of like sometimes inevitable degeneration that happens. So, for example, I've been wondering, like, well, like the consumer co-ops that are anti-worker, that are not hybrid co-ops, like, where do they get their money? Sometimes they get loans, right? Well, I'm wondering, like, if those loaning institutions can do a better job of, incentivizing hybrid cooperativism. I don't know. That's just something that came to mind though, as we're thinking about like where to put money, where to get it from,
Mm-hmm.
and not just money, but other ways in which people want to share.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, if you were like a member of shared capital or something, which the way that group functions, by the way, is a co-op of co-ops. So in order to get a loan from shared capital, you have to be a member of shared capital. Your co-op has to be a member of shared capital, and it's the members who decide who gets the loans. And it's a revolving loan fund. But if you're a member of shared capital and say REI, I don't think REI is a member of shared capital, but if they were and we're looking for a loan, then that would be, the opportunity for the members to speak up and say like, not while they're doing union busting.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. Okay. We'll move on to the next one here. A little bit, maybe a little easier, less technical question. What are the biggest communities of cooperatives in the U.S.? They say they would assume parts of Colorado due to regulations, but that's all they've got. John, do you know of any
Well, yeah,
particular areas that
I
you like?
when I pre-read this one, I guess it depends what they mean by. So there's the USFWC, which we're members of, which is the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. If that's what they mean by a community, but if they mean a community more of like co-op of co-ops type model, I know there's the one that I'm most familiar with. There's one in Cincinnati. Our friends at comp.coop are involved down there.
Is that Co-op Cincy? Is that?
Yeah, yep, co-op Cincy. Yeah, thank you. New York City, obviously, like I mentioned, that there's a lot going on down there. I don't know offhand the names of any of the groups though. Uh, and then there's things like Collab, which we know them a bit, but that's more. I don't know if that's a co-op of co-ops, but more just a dispersed workforce of tech people. And then there's also the patio community that I mentioned before, but that's more global. It's not specifically in the US, and that's mostly tech companies. So it's pretty much all virtual companies. There are no real physical offices for a lot of the companies that are in patio. But again, my specialty is more in the tech side, so things like electricity co-ops and
Mhm.
grocery stores. I don't know as much about that stuff, but
Yeah. I mean, for like geographical clusters of co-ops in the U.S., we certainly don't have as many as a lot of other places in the world, but
fortunately,
some of them are the Bay Area. We've got the network of Bay Area worker co-ops there that has a whole lot of members. Of course, the Arizmendi bakeries there in the Bay Area, half a dozen of those. And then a lot of other avenues, worker cooperatives. There you go, Chris. Yeah,
oh
pull up
yeah,
that
there
map.
it is.
So we can see, we got 70. Is that I'm looking there? And then Wisconsin, there's a lot in Madison relative to the size of that place. And yeah, we're zooming in a little bit. New York City has probably technically the most of any like city, I would think. I don't have the exact numbers, but I have seen some pretty big numbers coming out of there, although sometimes I question how many of, the businesses that get counted as co-ops are actually co-ops. We've talked about this before. Sometimes the numbers can get a little fuzzy. Uh, so, but yeah, I tend to think of NYC, Madison, Wisconsin, and San Francisco as like the three kind of big places where you'll find more than one or two co-ops, right? And not just consumer co-ops, but lots of worker co-ops. Chris, have you, in your travels, have you discovered any co-op?
I've been wondering how this Park Forest co-op fits in, because supposedly it has 2,000 cooperative dwelling
Wow.
units under 5 nonprofit corporations in Illinois.
Mhm.
I've been wanting to check it out. Uh, do
Yeah,
you know how that might compare to other places? For sure, compared to Chicago, that's a like 2,000 units. Even if
That's
half of them are only being used, that's a lot of like dense cooperative relationships. Um,
yeah, and I mean it's interesting. They say cooperative dwelling units, but there are 5 different nonprofit corporations. So I wonder what the model that they're using is for that. It sounds maybe like it's a little bit like a co-op city in New York City, which as far as I know, is the largest cooperative housing complex in the country. Although that one is obviously giving it a run for its money. 2,000, that's a lot. So like that could everybody that lives in my little town could fit in there with like
yeah.
times 4. We would have 3/4 of the building left over the building for parties. So yeah, anyway, it looks like there's at least, yeah, those big housing co-ops. And they're also, in New York City, again, another, like, there's a lot of co-ops. They get called co-ops, but they're like, I think they're more like, they're
They're like
kind of
condo associations or something. Yeah.
condominiums. Yeah, they're more like condo associations. We would occasionally get questions from people on the Reddit co-ops page. It's like, don't know about paying your dues and the super and all that. So let's see. Here we have a seasonal campground cooperative. They say user color me K8 says, hello. We received a notice of sale for our seasonal campground. We are a mix of permanent, which is a majority, with a few transient sites. We are currently organizing against the sale and have a majority needed to do so. We are trying to form a cooperative, looking for any information, resources, and experience to get this ball rolling. I think Chris may
can you
have
share the
run into
page?
a similar situation. Oh, I'm sorry. It keeps getting removed and I forget to put it back. So here we go. So seasonal campground cooperative. So there are a couple of organizations that come to my mind right off the bat. The first is Rock USA, resident-owned communities, a great nonprofit that works with communities all over the country to do exactly this, to convert mobile home parks into from private ownership into cooperative ownership. And one of the other organizations that Rock USA works with pretty closely is NeighborWorks, and they have offices around the country. I think they're on kind of a state-by-state basis. So like here in Montana, we have NeighborWorks Montana that's done a couple of these conversions. So if you're in this kind of situation, I would say look up NeighborWorks for your state if you're in the US, and Rock USA. Yeah, and no clever password commented and said commongoodmanagement.coop, who I have not actually heard of before, but that might be another one.
Yeah, that website looks interesting for that common good.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're doing like the same. They look like they're doing similar stuff, but
I wonder if
maybe
this is
not
more.
that niche.
This is like a property management company.
Hmm.
Well, interesting. What
How
did
would
they
it
say?
fit in?
Common good management services. Yeah, I mean, well, it's always you can talk to people. Never
I
hurts
visited
to connect.
I visited some of the folks I mentioned who are working with Rock USA here in San Antonio, Texas for that mobile home co-op, and it was a really cool conversation to have with those folks. They're like proud owners now of and like they understand like, no, we're the owners, even though like they're still learning all the other stuff about the structure and running it. Um, that one they're a little, they're they can't speak to it as confidently, but it feels really good to see neighbors of around that area being kind of like very firm that, yeah, we're the owners, we own this stuff now. And I talked to Rock. Well, I emailed them I think in 2020 about this one trailer home. I'm sorry, mobile home park.
Manufactured home.
And yeah, that some of the tenants, they kind of wanted to just buy it already instead of dealing with um their landlord. They're thinking about it, and it turns out that it seems that Rock USA has to do a lot of work in the background with like local governments to try to get support to deal with like the sewage. It seems like there's some infrastructure stuff that it's just like it's a lot of money for residents to handle on their own, and I think they got to influence like the government to try to take on those costs to make the effort affordable for the proto owners.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's I appreciate the work they do in the background to make that stuff happen, especially people like me who don't want to talk directly to the government.
Yeah, no, there's I mean that I'm very well acquainted with manufactured homes, mobile homes, trailers, as I've always called them, living in them, and yeah, a lot of them are on septic, and so if you've got a mobile home park and you just got several septic tanks, like getting that put onto, those kind of infrastructure improvements uh, can be expensive, but yeah, you've got people like Rock to help out, dealing with your city government, and also, depending on the situation, you may well not have to deal with that other, that kind of stuff. From what I've seen in terms of numbers, and there's probably, there could be some bias in the numbers, the people who succeed are more likely to talk about it, kind of thing. But it does seem like pretty much everybody who is successful in buying their mobile home park either keeps their rates the same or can lower them and improve services at the same time. Like, because it's a very extractive industry. I mean, it turns out it doesn't cost very much money to let people park their quote unquote mobile home there. It's like it costs you nothing, and then you just for 20 years you've been letting the place degrade, and so it's gravy. Anything you want to add, John, before we move on here?
No, I didn't know any of that stuff that you guys just mentioned. That's really cool to know. But
definitely.
I see people taking ownership of their own place they live. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead, Chris.
With those tenants that I was working with, that was kind of like one of the most upsetting situations where I've ever seen of like a slumlord, and and that I'm used to. I just get surprised at how many evil landlords there are out there and the different shapes that they take. And I would love to see this successful.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, it's the mobile home park conversions are like, they lift my heart up more than anything else, really, because I've lived in that situation a lot. Like, and a lot of people I'm friends with, those are my folks, and we're told, you can't do anything. You're not competent. You're just good for pushing a broom and taking out the garbage and that kind of stuff, know. And you live in a crappy trailer and blah blah blah, and to be able to own the place with and have this cool thing that you create, that it's not a bunch of college educated social justice warrior
or
people,
private equity
like we would expect. It's like, no, this is just like my redneck aunt and a bunch of her friends like did something super cool. Like, this is awesome. So I really appreciate it. And hearing Chris tell that story.
It's
people getting that ownership mentality is like, all right, yes,
for sure. It's one of the most scandalous things that's happened in the last 10 years is how many homes have been bought by private equity firms. There's a whole industry out there, these MFers buying up neighborhoods. I mean, it's insane. And the people, they're just treated as an investment, and somebody living 500 miles away is got, getting income from this thing. They have no relationship whatsoever to the area where the housing is, but and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some private equity people sniffing around mobile home park ownership because anything that those guys can come in and, like you said, just extract the resources out of, that they'll do it. So power to you guys. Take ownership of where you live. So
yeah. So here we have a little bit of a complicated question. And let's see. This is from Dayer2121. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. They say, a question for co-ops that deal in industries with a lot of compliance issues. There's a lot here. I'm going to kind of skip to the bottom. How does a co-op ensure that they stay in compliance with the law, even if doing so isn't popular with the worker owners? Again, this is a question of personal liability and safety regulations. So issues around things like law enforcement, police, etc., aren't relevant here. So if you have an industry, if you're working in an industry where there are a lot of like federal and state safety regulations and requirements and hoops you got to jump through and people that have to sign off on things, how do you deal with that if, well, as he says, even if doing so isn't popular with the worker owners?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it, John.
This one, I have no experience whatsoever in aviation regulations. But when they said the mechanic is personally liable to whatever they sign off, including work done by their apprentices. But in most cases, a co-op is a corporation. So, like, the reason the LLCs exist is to limit liability. It's the very definition of what it is. So I don't know if that, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, but so whether you're working for a corporation that is, Lockheed or whatever, or an airport or something, or a corporation that's a co-op, I don't know how the liability, in other words, just because it's a co-op, I don't think that affects the liability at all. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, so this one I didn't quite understand what,
Yeah.
if
Yeah,
it's more,
I mean, I can understand. I guess, I mean, that if you've got, just some regulations, and we kind of deal with a similar sort of thing sometimes in financing. You go to get a loan from the bank, and the bank wants a single signer on there to put even though it's for the co-op, that same kind of situation. And I think on the level of just like the interpersonal relations in the co-op, it's like, well, you obviously the members of the co-op need, if they don't get that they have to follow the regulations, there needs to be some education going on or something. Right. I'm sure the aviation mechanic can explain, like, planes need to not fall out of the air, and it's like point to Boeing, and we don't want to be that. So it would seem like
voting, no flying caskets.
Yeah, it almost seems like the kind of hypothetical question that's like, is this really going to be an issue?
Yes. All right. Do we everybody in favor of complying with the law say like,
right?
That's the part. It's like, well, okay, I don't.
I mean, I could definitely see maybe somebody wanting to cut some corners to save a little money somewhere. It's not going to make a big difference or something. I don't know. This also made me think of the bit from the Own the Change documentary that Laura Flanders show put together several years ago, and they interviewed in there somebody from the Dig co-op that they do landscaping, and the guy, one of the founders, said he's like, people think, oh, worker co-op, everything is democratic and everybody's like going to be arguing about every decision. And he says that's no. Like, when our rule here is, when we're in the field, when we're like on somebody's property, digging holes and cutting trenches and doing all the stuff that we're doing, there's a manager. There's somebody who's like, he knows what to do. And when he tells you to do something, you do it. And you do it in the way that they tell you to do it. And if you don't like the way that they told you to do it or what they told you to do or whatever, then we come back to the office. So he's like, it's hierarchy in the field, democracy in the office. So, you know, so it's like it's not that everybody has the same say on every single thing. And I think a lot of that would also fit here. It's like in your operating agreement, who has the right to make what decisions is going to be, you know,
and
determined.
even what type, like in ours, we have different, you know, definitions of what is required. In other words, if we're voting on certain things, some things require unanimous votes, other things require majority, others require 2/3. Like you can structure it in that way too. So you're like, look, anything having to do with this, whatever this controversial compliance thing happens to be, it's like that's just a simple majority thing. Like, whereas something that, you know, could be harmful to the entire co-op is it has to be, you know, a 75% vote, or you know, so you can structure it that way. Like to your point, I think a lot of people sometimes equate democracy with unanimous. Doesn't always have to be 100%. We all agree. You know, it's majority rules or different percentages you can set up for different types of decisions as well.
Yeah,
I feel like the more I see this, the more I kind of have empathy for the question, because I wonder if it's like they're talking about like when within the context of seeing a lot of conflict aversion,
Yeah.
And maybe they're afraid of like the reality that, oh, I won't really be able to stand up to my peer when I see that, which is a
That's
big
true.
thing. And
Yeah.
and maybe they've also seen like maybe they're like at work, they've seen people saying just, you know, breaking the law, and they don't really care because like maybe the liability, maybe some of it's like well, in a situation where you're under an employer, you know, sometimes you don't feel like the liability is really you, but if you're gonna be in a work co-op, you're taking on the liability of your coworker as well.
Yep.
So I wonder if like they're thinking about those dynamics. Um, but I also wonder if there's ways in which other cooperators could step in on this stuff too, because I feel like that's something that maybe needs to happen for certain situations where, you know, it's kind of hard for that conflict to be brought up and solved locally. It reminds me, I wonder, what reminds me of this conversation I had at a meat plant that I worked at, where I actually was able to talk to the former owner, and I told him, I said, hey man, like the USDA is actually kind of terrible, I think, at kind of like ensuring cleanliness and all that of the meat in the plant. And he goes, oh yeah, the USDA is kind of, their thing is not to ensure really safety for the consumer. And he said, if you really want, he said when he owned it, the people who were really hard to satisfy, but who actually looked out for the consumer, were consumer co-ops that actually
Huh.
go into the space and ensure that things were really good for the consumer. So I wonder if there's like if co-ops can step in to mediate this stuff to make sure things are going well,
Right.
uh, and probably create higher standards. Um, I don't know. Maybe that's probably, you know, I kind of feel like that's one of the things that happens though in alienated economic processes. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're not in touch with the people who it's for, you kind of
Yep.
start not caring. Or that can easily happen. But
mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's heard of, you know, that type of like de-alienation and something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know Chris is getting ready to leave us here. We will.
Yeah, I gotta take off, but thanks for, it was nice meeting you,
Yeah.
John.
Good
Sorry I
meeting
can't
you,
stay
Chris.
on
Thanks so
longer.
much. Yeah.
I
Thank
want to
you.
stay on
Good.
longer, but I, you know.
That's
All
okay.
right.
Good
Well, bye
meeting
everyone.
you. All right. Thanks, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do one last question here. Do you have any?
I
Let's see, what
just,
do we
the ones that were in the comments I looked at and they looked really useful. I mean, there's
better
the
follow? Here we go.
USFWC newsletter, which I find
Yeah.
useful.
So publications to follow for co-ops. They have the NCBA CLUSA. This is the National Cooperative Business Alliance. Cooperative League of the USA is what it stands for. The worst named co-op organization, most most awkwardly named co-op organization, goes to NCBA CLUSA. Cooperatornews.com, that is one I'm not familiar with. ICA.coop, they have a newsletter. Thenews.coop, this is the UK, the cooperative group in the UK. That's their news source. And then, of course, our own Geo newsletter that everyone is encouraged to subscribe to, rather. So there's they've got a new design on the co-op news site. Looking very pleasing. That's the Cooperator News. Oh, this is for New York specifically. So yeah, I think those are all pretty good newsletters. Any other co-op news sites or any other blogs or anything like that you like to follow, John?
I don't subscribe to. I mean, the USFWC stuff. I mean, but no, actually, this is something. This question prompted me to start looking around because I realized that I don't subscribe to a ton of things for co-op news. So
yes, well, I'll just clue you, I guess, and everybody else in that it seems like most co-op organizations, not worker co-ops, but like the networks have some kind of newsletter, and I get a bajillion of them every week. The NCBA CLUSAs, USFWCs are good. The SELC has a newsletter that's worth subscribing to as well. I kind of tend to subscribe to just a lot of them, just on general principle. But if you're in the East Coast, the VOC, Valley Alliance of Worker Co-ops, it's nice to stay up on what they're doing. And so if you're in like the Midwest, the Madison MadWork. I'm not Madison Worker Owned Cooperatives is what it stands for. MadWork, the network of worker co-ops. They have a newsletter that's always got good stuff in it. So basically, I'd just say any organization, if you're checking out somebody's website, odds are they have a newsletter. Too. Yeah, it's worth it. And John, you're when I was looking at your website, kind of preparing for this, I saw your blog and that you'd written some blogs about the conversion process, and I hope you keep writing about co-op stuff and not just about tech stuff, because I'm going to start checking it now. So that's another one.
For sure. I've been doing so much biz dev stuff in the last month that I've been neglecting my blogging responsibilities. But yeah, I want to. There's a couple more I have in mind that I want to do. So probably the next month, hope to get to those.
Yeah. It's always good to get the information from somebody who's using it and experiencing it right then. So
for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we will wrap it up, and I'll do it for another Reddit Q&A. And we'll be back again next month, or at least I will be. And so.
Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. Yeah, but I learned a lot. Not only I came to answer questions, but I actually think I learned more than I taught people. So that's always good.
Same here.
All right, Josh, have a good weekend.